Greetings, Springs Church. I want to begin this devotional time with you with a question a lot of people have asked me, and a very simple question. How do I read the Bible? And let me tell you, there's so many answers to that. And I could probably preach a sermon series for 2 months on it and not get to all of the information that's out there. But a few things I just want to touch on today. Number one, a lot of people always ask me, what translation should I read? Should I read the NIV? Should I read the NLT? Should I read King James Version? It sounds holier. I love the these. I love the thous. To be 100% honest, the translation you should read is the one that you read. Whatever you enjoy to read, whatever will cause you to read the Bible, that's what you should be reading. Now, I will say this, just to preface all of that. Some people always ask me, well, what about the Message? Well, I'll be 100% honest. The Message is not a translation. And the Message and the author of the Message makes that very clear. It's a paraphrase. Not a bad thing to read with the Bible, but it's not a translation of the Bible. So which translation should I read? Well, whichever one you will read. And feel free, as we're going through this Road to Emmaus journey, to try out a few different translations if you would like, and see if anything kind of sticks with you and helps engage your heart in the Word of God. Another thing people always ask me is, well, how should I read the Bible, in the sense of where do I start and where do I go, and how they're trying to figure out, do I read this verse? Do I read that chapter? Well, let me just say this. There's a lot of Bible reading plans out there that kind of get you to read one chapter in one book and then kind of switch you to a few verses or another chapter in another book. And just to be honest, I'm not saying any of those things are bad, but I find them extremely confusing because the Word of God builds on top of itself. If you're reading the book of Romans, Paul is leading somewhere. He's going verse by verse, chapter by chapter. Remember, the scriptures were never written with chapter breaks or verses. They're literally letters. It's a continuous thought from beginning to end. So I would say this, whatever book you choose to read in the Bible, make sure you read it from the start to the end of it. If you're going to read through Romans, or you're going to read through Philippians, or you're going to read through 1 Samuel, read through it from the very start until the last chapter of the book. And it will help bring some measure of context to what you're actually reading, which is so important when you're studying the Word of God. For myself, I get up in the morning and I kind of open the front of my concordance or the front of my Bible, and I'll pray a little bit, and I'll pick out a book from the concordance in the beginning of the Word, and I will read that book from beginning to end. Then when I get done with that book, I pray a little bit and I open it back up and I'll pick another book and I'll say, I'm going to read Deuteronomy, and I'll read it from beginning to end. And as you read it that way, not only does it give context to what you're reading, but you start seeing the historical timeline of the scriptures. It takes time to see all that, and it takes years for God to put that all together. But if you keep doing it year in and year out, it will become like second nature to you. Lastly, let me just say this. If all you're doing is reading a chapter a day and you're not applying it to your life, to be 100% honest, reading the Bible could become very task-orientated and it could become worthless. You got to learn to apply it. People always ask me, well, how do you do that? Well, you exercise the muscle of your mind. It's so funny. We use the muscles of our hands. We use the muscles of our feet. We tell it to do certain things like open up a door, or we tell it to go grab something. But you got to do the same thing when you study through the Word. When you read through a chapter, you have to ask yourself, and I want you to get this, what in this chapter, what verse can I take away that's going to be an encouragement to my heart today? And you have to tell your mind, go find a verse that I can use, that I can learn from, that I can grow from today. And when you grab that verse, this is what I do. I hold on to it and I preach it to myself 3 or 4 times throughout my whole afternoon when I'm just at work, wherever I'm at. I preach it to myself so I get it deep inside of my heart. For example, I was just reading the chapter, Romans chapter 5 the other day. And as I came up to Romans chapter 5, I was reading Romans chapter 5, verse 1, where Paul literally says, therefore, and he talks about being justified in Jesus Christ. Now that we've been justified, we have peace with God. I went on through the rest of the chapter, but I grabbed a hold of that verse. My mind, I locked in on that verse. And all day, I set the timer on my phone 2 or 3 times a day where I would stop just for 3 minutes and I would preach it. I say, I have peace with God. I love how the scripture doesn't say peace of God. I don't just have the peace of God, I have peace with God. And I would preach it to myself. That means my sins have been forgiven. That means I have been washed clean. That means the wrath of God has been taken on Jesus Christ, that I can go before his throne boldly, even with all the mistakes that I made as I'm confessing those things to God. And I preach that to myself 2 or 3 times throughout the day. By the time I'm done with the day, not only do I remember everything that was in that chapter, but the word of God has now been applied to my life. And it's sunk down not just in my head, but in my heart, where the rubber finally hits the road. So here are just a few ideas of how to actually read the Bible. I know others have a lot of opinions, but maybe you can apply them through the rest of our Road to Emmaus journey with one another. Springs Church, I love you. Look forward to seeing you again soon. I hope you have a great day.